Welcome back to Global IQ. Today we're diving into a controversial topic, the whitest states in America. Now it's important to approach this topic with sensitivity and understanding, but it's also important to acknowledge that demographics have a huge influence on the culture and politics of a place. So without further ado, let's explore the top 15 whitest states in America in 2025. Places where the majority of the population is overwhelmingly white. Some of these states have been this way for decades, while others are just starting to show signs of change. Coming in at number 15 is Montana, where about 89.6% of the population is white. Montana is known for its rugged landscapes, majestic mountains, and sprawling prairies. There's no doubt that the state's small population, around 1.1 million, lends itself to a predominantly white culture. Cities like Billings and Missoula are home to a handful of diverse communities, but the state's overall makeup is still very much dominated by its European-descended inhabitants. Despite Montana's increasing popularity as a vacation destination, it remains one of the whitest states in the nation. Up next at number 14, we have Nebraska, where the population is about 89.9% white. Known for its farmlands and rural lifestyle, Nebraska has a strong Midwestern identity that remains largely white. Even in larger cities like Omaha and Lincoln, the state has maintained its majority white demographic, though Nebraska has experienced immigration in recent decades, particularly from Latino communities. It remains deeply rooted in its European American heritage. For a state with a population of 1.9 million, that's a lot of whiteness, still shaping the culture and values of the region. Wyoming, at number 13, comes in with an 88.6% white population. Known for its wide open spaces and cowboy culture, Wyoming remains one of the most rural and isolated states in America. With fewer than 600,000 people, Wyoming is not only the least populated state in the U.S., but it's also one of the least racially diverse. While places like Cheyenne and Jackson are starting to attract tourists and some new residents, the majority of the population is still white, and the state's history is steeped in frontier traditions and settler heritage. At number 12, we have Iowa, with 89.8% white residents. Known for its cornfields, farms, and agriculture, Iowa is one of the heartlands of the United States. Despite the growing Hispanic and Asian populations in cities like Des Moines and Cedar Rapids, Iowa's culture is still very much shaped by its white roots. It's a state where traditional values are still prevalent, and much of its population enjoys a rural, close-knit lifestyle. It's also where you'll find some of the best schools in the country, which only further contributes to its appeal to families, especially those looking for a quiet, less diverse place to settle down. North Dakota comes in at number 11 with an 89.9% white population. Like its southern neighbor, North Dakota is known for its vast plains and agriculture. While cities like Fargo are seeing some growth, the overall state is still defined by its predominantly white culture. North Dakota is a state that has remained relatively unchanged in its demographic makeup over the past few decades. With a small population of just over 700,000, it's a place where farmers and ranchers still dominate the economy, and white Americans still represent the vast majority. Coming in at number 10 is Kentucky, where 89.9% of the population is white. Known for its bourbon, bluegrass, and horse racing, Kentucky's culture is deeply influenced by its white Appalachian heritage. Whether you're in Lexington, Louisville, or one of the more rural areas, the state's demographics remain largely white, with few signs of significant change. The legacy of European settlers, especially those from Scotland and Ireland, continues to shape the state's identity, even as the country around it grows more diverse. Arkansas takes the number 9 spot with an 89.9% white population. While the state has a significant black population, especially in cities like Little Rock, its overall population remains dominated by white residents. Arkansas has long been a place where Southern values and rural living are strong, and these communities are still mostly white. In recent years, there have been signs of diversification in the larger cities, but Arkansas is still a state where white culture predominates, especially in more isolated regions. At number 8, we have Tennessee with 89.9% white residents. Known for its rich music history, from Nashville's country scene to the blues of Memphis, Tennessee has a cultural diversity that's still largely white in terms of population. And the state is home to rolling hills, farmlands, and major urban centers, but the majority of its residents are white, particularly in the more rural areas. And the population density of Tennessee, coupled with its growing appeal as a relocation spot, hasn't significantly shifted its racial demographics, and white residents are still the majority here. At number 7, it's South Dakota, home to 86.2% white people. This state has been the backdrop for Native American history, but it's still very much dominated by its white population. Rapid City, Sioux Falls, and small towns like Deadwood are all places where you'll find a lot of white faces and very little diversity. And small towns like Deadwood are all places where you'll find a lot of white faces and very little diversity. In South Dakota, life moves at its own pace, rural, isolated, and proudly white. Despite being a state with a rich indigenous history, the landscape here is shaped mostly by white settlers and their descendants. South Dakota's population is small, around 900,000 people, but the majority is still firmly white. Ohio, coming in at number 6, has a population that's 88.3% white. This state has a mix of urban and rural, but even in the big cities like Cleveland and Columbus, the majority is still white. Ohio's historic Midwestern culture is reflected in its cities and towns where the influence of German, Irish, and Polish communities dominate. Even with a steady increase in immigration over the past few decades, Ohio's largest cities remain overwhelmingly white. The state has a strong working class vibe, and much of it feels like a snapshot of classic American life, full of suburban neighborhoods, sports events, and Midwestern values. Now let's talk about Maine, where the whiteness is impressive. 90.5% white to be exact. It's a state that feels like it's frozen in time, with its picturesque coastal towns, lighthouses, and of course lobster traps. But beyond the postcard scenery, it's still a very homogeneous place. While Portland is slowly getting more diverse, the rest of the state remains predominantly white, and it's a state where historical and cultural traditions hold strong. Maine is like that place where you don't expect to see many outsiders. If anything, it feels like everyone's a local. The pace of life is slow, and white culture still takes center stage. You won't hear much about racial issues here, but that's probably because the people are so alike. And if you're looking for a place to escape the world and dive into some New England charm, Maine is your spot. At number 4, we have Vermont, a state where 91.5% of the population is white. Vermont's scenic beauty, green mountains, ski resorts, and organic farms has long been a haven for those seeking peace and solitude. However, it's also one of the least racially diverse states in the country. A strong sense of self-reliance and libertarian ideals permeate the state, but Vermont's white culture remains deeply rooted in its historical and geographical isolation. The lack of diversity can be attributed to Vermont's small size and remote location, but also to its historical focus on white European settlers. Although progressive in many ways, Vermont is still a place where you might find it hard to see any ethnic mix, unless you're in the larger cities like Burlington, but even there, the change is minimal. New Hampshire sits at number 3, with 92.2% white people. If you're into small-town America, white landscapes, and a pace of life that moves just a little slower, New Hampshire is your state. Known for its autumn foliage and mountain views, New Hampshire's population is one of the whitest in the nation, and its towns feel like something out of a nostalgic movie. New Hampshire has a proud history of being a stronghold of conservative ideals, and its whiteness is intertwined with its long-standing traditions. While Manchester and Nashua are growing and becoming more urbanized, the rest of the state is still predominantly white, with rural communities that have barely seen any significant demographic shift. The state's politics and culture remain largely shaped by its white heritage. At number 2, we have Wyoming, which boasts a population that's 92.6% white. This state, famous for its wide open spaces, mountain ranges, and cowboy culture, has a long history of being wholly white. It's one of the most remote states in America, with a sparse population, just over 580,000 people, and a culture that's rooted in ranching, wildlife, and frontier days. There's not a lot of diversity in Wyoming, and its towns reflect this. If you love the Wild West and isolated life, Wyoming is the place to be. Whether it's Yellowstone National Park or the Old West towns like Cheyenne, Wyoming carries its whiteness proudly. It's a place where you're more likely to find a local rancher than any ethnic melting pot. And finally, the whitest state in America in 2025, Idaho. With a staggering 93.4% white population, Idaho takes the top spot. Famous for potatoes, ski resorts, and outdoor adventures, Idaho is also a place where whiteness defines the culture and identity. There are over 1.8 million people here, and the vast majority of them are white, whether it's in Boise, Coeur d'Alene, or the surrounding mountains. Idaho's history and culture are deeply tied to its European settler roots, and the state's identity hasn't changed much over the years. Sure, it has some hip cities like Boise, but even there, diversity is hard to come by. Idaho's population is almost entirely white, and it remains a state where heritage and isolation take center stage. If you're looking for a place to live that feels stuck in a time capsule, Idaho is the epitome of that. So there you have it, the top 15 whitest states in America in 2025. Some of these states are hidden gems for those looking for small-town living or isolated beauty, while others reflect a broader trend of whiteness that still pervades much of rural America. But if there's anything these states show us, it's that America's identity is still being shaped by its past, and diversity is still a long way off in certain parts of the country. Do you agree with the rankings, or do you think there are states that should have made the cut? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with your friends. As always, thanks for watching. This is Global IQ, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to learn more about America's diverse culture, hit that bell icon to stay updated on all future videos. See you next time.